Welcome to the Eat Away Kidney Stones podcast. I'm your host, registered dietitian and kidney stone expert, Melanie. After learning a ton about kidney stones and helping people prevent stones at the University of Chicago, I was fed up with all the terrible advice people were finding online. So I decided to do something about it. The Kidney Dietitian was born. This podcast is for people who want to learn what actually works to prevent kidney stones and still enjoy life, eating, and their favorite foods. Let's dive in. Hello and welcome to the 119th episode of the Eat Away Kidney Stones podcast. As always, I am your host, registered dietitian and kidney stone expert, Melanie. And today I wanted to talk about eggs, which are such a hot topic from so many angles. And so many people, whenever I talk about protein in kidney stones, because I use the term non-dairy animal protein and how when you eat too much non-dairy animal protein, it could increase the risk of kidney stones for some people. And a lot of people say, okay, well, what about eggs? Because I do think that term non-dairy animal protein is kind of confusing. I use that term, by the way, because that is what is used in the American Urological Association guidelines, non-dairy animal protein. And they sort of take dairy out of that equation because we know that dairy is, of course, very, very good for calcium oxalate, specifically kidney stone prevention. And we know that it's really important for anyone with calcium, any type of calcium-based stone, that they get in enough calcium, and dairy is, of course, a great place to get that calcium. But eggs, how do they fall into that? Are they a non-dairy animal protein or not? And do people with kidney stones need to worry about how many eggs they eat? Can they eat eggs? And the answer is yes, of course, you can eat eggs. In fact, I think eggs can be a really, really wonderful part of any kidney stone prevention diet. So let's dive into it a little bit. Why do I like eggs? Why did I just say they're good for you? And do we need to be concerned about them? Because, spoiler alert, they are technically a non-dairy animal protein. However, that does not mean that you cannot eat them. As I like to say, there's very little in nutrition that is absolute other than like allergies and celiac disease, right? Sort of like with sodium, right? We often say, all right, well, salt is bad for kidney stones. Okay, well, yes, too much salt is not great for many people with kidney stones. However, we need some salt, right? And same thing with protein. And eggs, I think, can actually be a really great, healthful way to get protein, even for people with kidney stones, even though they fall into that non-dairy animal protein category. So first of all, why am I sitting here sort of promoting eggs? Why am I talking about it? And I think I am, because eggs really are a great source of protein and a great source of many nutrients that many of us are not getting enough of. Although we do generally eat enough protein, a lot of us are not eating enough vitamin D, and eggs are a great source of vitamin D. They're also a great source of vitamin B12, which many of us are getting enough of. However, if you are vegan or vegetarian, if you're vegan, it's actually impossible to get B12 because it's only found in animal foods, and a lot of times, or in any sort of amount. So it's oftentimes vegans need to take a B12 supplement, but vegetarians oftentimes are having a hard time getting in enough B12 because it is found mostly in animal foods, and so eggs are a great source of that. And a lot of times vegetarians do consume eggs, so I wanted to throw that out there. They're also a great source of choline, that protein. Like I mentioned, one egg has about 6-ish grams of protein and also a lot of antioxidants. So there's lots of really, really great stuff about eggs. And I also want to mention that nearly all of that good stuff that I mentioned, other than protein, so that vitamin D, B12, choline, antioxidants, most of those things are found in the yolk of the egg, right? Whereas most of the protein is actually found in the egg white. And so I feel like there's always this, controversy, egg whites or whole egg. I am very team pro whole egg, very team whole egg. Because if you are throwing away that yolk or only eating egg whites, you are missing out on all of those good things. Of course, the next question that I'm sure is coming to your mind is, but Melanie, what about cholesterol? And yes, of course, eggs have cholesterol. We've known that for a long time, but we now know that more updated data is that the cholesterol in eggs Well, honestly, actually, cholesterol in anything doesn't really impact for most people. So it is true for some people, but for most people, dietary cholesterol or the cholesterol that you get in your diet doesn't seem to impact blood levels of cholesterol that much. But instead, it's actually saturated fat that we need to focus on to lower blood levels of cholesterol, which doesn't make a lot of sense. But as we learn a lot through kidney stone nutrition, and as I do my best to kind of break down the pathophysiology of kidney stones, we know that nutrition is not that straightforward, and what you put in your mouth may not necessarily what ends up in your blood or have the intended or expected effect of what you would be. And so we now know is that how much cholesterol you eat is really not probably that important for most people. Again, it does matter for some people, but for most people, dietary cholesterol doesn't really matter in terms of blood cholesterol. Instead, if you do struggle with high cholesterol levels, it makes a whole lot more sense to focus on reducing how much saturated fat you consume. It seems like saturated fat in the diet is a whole lot more important when it comes to reducing those bad or those LDL cholesterol levels, and also making sure actually that you get in enough fiber. That's another really, really great way to get in those to reduce those LDL, those bad cholesterol levels. And so, yes, in the yellow part, there is all of that good stuff, right? All those vitamins, minerals, antioxidants. And that also is where the cholesterol lives, nearly all of it. But again, it's really that saturated fat that we're way more concerned about. So are you saying, Melanie, okay, cool, I can eat 10 eggs a day and I'm fine? Well, guys, let's be reasonable here. Obviously, we need to not go crazy with anything, right? You can have too much of anything. I think a very common recommendation that I think is very reasonable is to have no more than about 7 eggs a week, right? So having 2 eggs every single day, 4 eggs every single day, maybe not the best idea, because one egg, for the record, has like 190, 200-ish milligrams of cholesterol. And so that adds up quick, right? Especially when recommendations for cholesterol have ranged from no more than, say, 200 or 300 milligrams per day. Although, like I said, we now know that's probably not as important. But, if you're having 3 eggs a day, that's especially when you consider you're eating other food that likely has some cholesterol and easily 3 times the recommended amount. We want to just kind of be mindful of it. So I really like that recommendation of no more than 7 eggs a week, because again, they're such a great way to get in all of those other nutritional benefits, and there is some protein in them, and I just think they're really delicious. And the data is very clear that egg intake and cholesterol intake is not the problem when it comes to cholesterol and increased risk of heart disease. It really seems to be mostly the saturated fat that is more of the concern. And so, yeah, I think eggs can be a really, really great part of any kidney stone friendly diet. So, transitioning a little bit away from sort of my generic general health spiel on eggs, what about kidney stones and eggs specifically? And as I mentioned earlier, yes, eggs do technically count as part of that non-dairy animal protein. We care about non-dairy animal protein because when we eat too much of it, it could increase levels of calcium in our urine, it can increase acid levels in our urine, and it can also reduce citrate levels in your urine. So if you're looking at your 24-hour urine test, if any of those things are a concern for you, then making sure that you're not eating too much non-dairy animal protein does probably make sense. However, notice that I attempted to highlight or accentuate not much, right? I am not saying that you can have 0 non-dairy animal protein. That is simply not true, right? You do not have to be vegetarian or vegan if you don't want to. You can if you want, but you do not have to. You can definitely have some. The issue is when people are eating a ton of it, and eggs do have the nutrition profile that does make them essentially fit into that non-dairy animal protein component. However, when we look at the numbers, right, 1 egg, as I mentioned earlier, has like 6-ish grams of protein, 6 to 7. That is equivalent to 1 ounce of beef, pork, chicken, or fish. 1 ounce. 1 ounce is like 4 dice, right? Like if you think about, the standard deck of cards is your standard portion of meat. That's what we used to always say, right? So that is 3 or 4 ounces. So like 1/3 or 1/4 of a deck of cards is 1 ounce of meat. And that tiny little, that's like a bite, guys, like 1 bite, essentially 1 large bite, of meat is equivalent to one egg. And so, yes, it does fit into that non-dairy animal protein category. However, I just feel like you can very easily get away with eating 1 or 2 eggs, whereas eating 1 ounce of meat, like who does that, right? Unless it's mixed up in like a soup or a stir fry or something, like that's such a little amount of meat. And so even though it does technically fit into that non-dairy animal protein category, I feel like the way that we eat it makes it kind of somewhere in the middle, only because we're not going to eat as much eggs. Obviously, some people will sit there and eat a 4-egg omelet, and like that's fine if that's what you want to do. Like that's cool. But most of us are not doing that most of the time, right? A lot of times we're having just 1 or 2 eggs at a sitting, whereas we're very likely, if we're eating, say, a piece of chicken or fish or pork or something, to be eating more than 1 ounce. And so for that reason, I kind of like to put them in this gray area. They are technically that non-dairy animal protein, but there's just a lot less protein in them at the end of the day compared to what you'd realistically be eating from actual meat, if you will, right? And so when you think about it from that context, I do think it's a great way to get in some protein at breakfast. Again, there is no absolutes, very few absolutes in nutrition. And I'm not saying that we need to eat zero protein. Of course, our bodies need some protein, and it is even okay to have some non-dairy animal protein. It's just excess that gets us into trouble. And so I think eggs can be a really great way to get some protein in at breakfast, especially when we think about the traditional protein options at breakfast being things like bacon, sausage, and ham, right? Those things are obviously not the best for kidney people, with most people, for kidney stones, because they tend to be packed with sodium, and also are very salty, which is not great for a lot of people with any sort of calcium-based kidney stone or uric acid for that matter. And so I think eggs can be a really great way to get in a little bit of protein at breakfast. Again, having 1 or 2 eggs is going to get you 13-ish, or like 6 to 13-ish grams of protein. And so that's way less likely than if you were having actual a piece of meat, right? A piece of flesh at breakfast. Also, I think thinking about how you're eating those eggs and eggs and then the whole meal, right? So I think eggs can be a really great way to get in vegetables. They're a really great food to pair with vegetables. And when we think about, kind of going back to my eggs are bad for heart health, sort of debunking that, I think historically, right, we saw that eggs were associated with an increased risk of heart disease because we tend to eat them with bacon and sausage, which newsflash is not necessarily the best foods for us. But if you're having a 1 or 2 eggs mixed with peppers and onions and mushrooms, right? Or you're doing like an egg hash with potatoes and peppers and onions, or whatever other little bits of vegetables you have left over, tomatoes, whatever it is, right? I think it's really, really great to pair eggs with vegetables. And there's a lot of really like natural ways to do that. Also thinking about like a frittata or quiche or something, that can be a great way to get in some vegetables and get in that extra serving of vegetables in breakfast. So again, thinking about how you're eating that egg and not necessarily eating it with bacon or sausage can be a really, really great way. Some of my favorite recipes actually that I have on my website, I'll link to them in the show notes. I have an avocado toast recipe that I make all the time. I actually had it for breakfast today. So I think doing an avocado toast with an egg is a really wonderful breakfast. There's tons of great fiber, tons of really heart healthy fats to help keep you full, and a little bit of protein from that egg. That's one of my favorite breakfasts personally. I have that a lot. I also have a recipe for a zucchini crustless quiche, which essentially makes a frittata. I don't know why I named it like that, but essentially like a zucchini egg bake that has a lot of cheese in it, so you can get your calcium in. That's a really, really great recipe. And I also have a recipe for Southwest sweet potato hash that's delicious. I actually haven't made that one in quite some time. I probably should. I know that people are going to be up in arms about the sweet potatoes and the oxalate, but please review many other podcasts and pieces of content about how oxalate really is not the end all be all when it comes to kidney stones. And in fact, a lot of higher oxalate foods can actually be beneficial for kidney stone prevention as long as you are thinking about reducing the absorption of that oxalate primarily via adequate calcium, but that's a whole nother episode. So definitely check out those recipes if you're all interested, because I think they're really, really great examples for how to use some egg, but also use that egg as a vehicle to get in more fruits and vegetables, which really is one of the most important things that we can do to prevent kidney stones. So, in short, yes, eggs are non-dairy animal protein. They do fit into that category. However, there's way less of that protein in them at the end of the day, when you compare them to how you would realistically eat eggs versus meat, pork, fish, chicken, seafood, whatever it is. And I think eggs can be a really great vehicle to get in more vegetables into you, which most of us are not eating enough of for breakfast. Plus, eggs are packed with vitamin D, B12, choline, antioxidants, lots of minerals, lots of good stuff in them. All that good stuff is in the yellow part. So don't be afraid of the yellow part, right? Go ahead and eat that whole egg. So it's also going to be more satisfying because all the fat actually is in the yellows, or most of the fat is in the yellow as well. And that's going to help keep you full along with that bit of protein. So hopefully that helps for all of you egg lovers out there. Kind of gives you the green light to go ahead and enjoy some eggs and some tips for how to enjoy them in a kidney-friendly way. So with that, I will end this episode of the Eat Away Kidney Stones podcast. I hope that you found it helpful. Please, if you have any questions that you would like me to tackle on the podcast, I would love to hear from you. Head to kidneystonepodcast.com to record your question for a chance to get answered on the podcast, and I will see you again next Wednesday. Thank you for listening to today's episode. For more help with kidney stones, check out my website, www.thekidneydietitian.org. For more personalized help from me, check out my online course, Kidney Stone Nutrition School. VIP enrollment includes help directly from me. I can't wait to see you there and help you prevent kidney stones. Have a great day.